we work through technology to be able to meet this evening. I'll just look at the agenda real quickly. We don't have anyone here to provide public comments, so in a minute I'm going to turn it over to Rob, who just wants to do a recap of the process so far. You obviously have all met Steve Toller. You met him on our first meeting in January, and now tonight. He's been making sure that everybody is plugged in and ready to go. So he's going to do an initial presentation of budget strategies that he's developing, and you can see some of the verbiage here on the agenda itself. We'll look at he'll give us a primer, and then we'll do kind of an overview of his initial strategies. We do want to leave plenty of time for you to ask questions. Maybe I'll leave it to Steve to determine whether he needs to give a block of information before you can interrupt, or maybe you can interrupt from the very start. And then Joanne is going to do the balancing act for us and show you how that works. One of the questions we have for you there is, does this seem to be a good tool to use at the public meeting, which is now going to be on March 24th. And then we will talk a little bit about your initial ideas for the financial sustainability strategies. And I understand from the February 25th meeting that I missed that you're already kind of jumping into those. And then we'll just do a brief discussion of the March 24th public meeting. And I see that Darlene has just joined us too, so Darlene, welcome. Any questions as we get started?
All right.
Okay.
Looks like Darlene is about to join us. It says connecting to audio. Oh. Darlene, can you? Oh, looks like it's still trying. Is there a phone number she can call? Steve, do you have a number she can call?
It was on the agenda, so.
Oh, yeah.
It was actually.
Oh, it was in the email? Yeah. Okay.
Here's the number. Oh, that's not
the
a
ID.
meeting idea. Here it is, 669.
I'm just going to text her really quick. 669 900 9128 69 900.
9128.
Okay. And meeting ID is 578-637-667.
Has she made it on there? Oh.
Looks like she's in.
Hey, Darlene, are you in? Darlene, is that you? All right, well, I just gave her a number to call. All right, okay. Thanks, everybody, for being patient with this. I just kind of wanted to go over the process so far, and I have to say you've all been really good task force members, really good listeners, but also really good question askers. And did somebody just join?
Is that Anthony too?
Probably Anthony.
Anthony, hi. Oh, okay. All right. But yeah, you've been asking great questions, and it's been great. And I appreciate your patience and endurance through all these meetings so far. Just to remind you, at the first meeting, Steve Toller was there, and he gave a really good definition of the problem. He gave his own independent look at our financial forecast. His estimates showed that the lines cross in 2022, and then the problem gets worse from there, growing into an almost a $2 million a year problem in 2025, is it, Steve? 2025, 2026?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And so that we had a good problem definition at the first meeting, and then at the second meeting, we went over an overview of the city organization and the budgets by department and our revenues. Joanne went over our financial policies, and we've talked about We also talked about previous actions we've taken to keep the budget in balance over the years. And then at our third meeting, we went over some fiscal capacity comparisons with other cities and talked a little bit about price of government, and then dove into the priority-based budgeting model that we use. So tons of information, and Joanne and I kind of live and breathe this every day, so it's easier for us to grasp because we've been living it with it and in our life for years and years. So I know we've given you all a lot of information, and it's probably been like trying to drink out of a fire hose at times. So please know that if you ever want us to go over anything again or whatever, we're happy to do so at the committee level or meet with you one-on-one, whatever you need to get a grasp of all this information. We also know that there's some questions you all have asked. We've been trying to answer some of them along the way, but I think there still might be some questions or requests for information that we have not fully fulfilled yet, and I think we're trying to track those and get that information to you as well. So tonight, Steve Toller is going to give us his phase 2 of his scope of work that we have with him. So phase 1 was defining the problem, which he did at the first meeting, and tonight is phase 2, which is offering some ideas for possible solutions, not quite yet recommended solutions. On a parallel track, I'm working with my coworkers to get their thoughts on how to help the budget and help balance the budget. A few of those ideas Steve has incorporated, but the ideas from my coworkers continue to come in. They'll continue to flow in through this week. Once I get ideas from my coworkers, then we'll sift through all those and be sharing those with you as well at a future meeting. So, any questions on process so far? And okay, one thing we'll talk about towards the end of the agenda, but I'll just give you a sneak preview, is the public engagement meeting that was scheduled for next week. We moved it to the 24th. And we're proposing that also be a fully online meeting with the public. And remember, there's actually going to be 3 chances for the public to come to a public meeting during this process. The first one is going to be March 24th, but then they'll have 2 other chances between now and the end of April. So, but we'll talk more about that meeting towards the end. So, any questions? All right. Well, with that, I'll turn it over to Steve Toller.
Great. Thanks, Rob. I just want to be clear, there's a couple folks that it looks like are just by phone only, so I'll make sure that I refer to the slide numbers as I start walking through them and, as I move to the next slide, so that way y'all can do that. But for the rest of you that are able to see this on your computers, let me share the presentation, and then I'll go through it that way. So, and what I'll do is maybe I'll just stop every few slides or so and see if there's any questions. I know we're kind of all new to working on, and well, some of you use this all the time. Others are, this is the first, or maybe one of the few times that you use video conferencing. So I'll just stop as we go, just to make sure that if there's any questions as we go through it. So. Anyway, so there's things we want to talk about tonight. Is just, I want to give you an opportunity to understand kind of our project and what we're doing. We'll talk a little bit about fiscal sustainability planning and what that entails from our perspective. I'll spend most of the time kind of talking about an overview of the initial strategies. I don't intend tonight to go to deep dives with each one of them. Instead, what we're doing is we're identifying what strategies we want to investigate further through analysis. And so I'll refer to those and help orient you about what we're doing and help answer any questions you might have. But I'm not intending to do deep dive with each of those tonight necessarily. Instead, just kind of give you the broad brushstrokes about some of the strategies that we're analyzing. And then we'll talk about next steps, and then we'll just open it up so that we can all, discuss kind of thoughts about what we've seen and then, other ideas and thoughts that you might have. So with that, let me move to the kind of the project overview. And as Rob had indicated, this is a slide that I shared with you. Is it almost a couple months ago now? Wow, so it's at least 6 weeks ago or more, where the city does have in its forecast a structural deficit. The deficit grows to about $2 million by the time we hit 2026. In this next year, in this current year that we're in, and then this next year, it appears to be balanced. But as we talked about, there's that convergence of revenues not growing as fast as expenditures, and that leads to a bleed, if you will, in the resources in the general fund. And if it were not corrected, but that's why you're been asked to do the work you're doing and why we've been asked to do the work we're doing, and the council's clearly committed to doing that as well. If it's not corrected, though, it would show that the city would go underneath its targeted minimum reserves by about 2023, and would fall below zero as we start approaching 2026. And of course, nobody wants to do that. And so the concept that we're focused on as a firm is providing strategies that will help cure this growing deficit. And it's one thing to try to find $2 million in annual either revenue enhancements and or expenditure reductions by 2026. But the problem, as you see here, is the continued growth and the continued problem that we talked about in our first meeting of revenues not keeping pace with the cost of providing services. With that, the city engaged us to do a couple things. Firstly was to review and update the financial fiscal model, and we've done that work. That was the nature of when we met with you in January. The second piece of this now is to really help them to develop a set of recommended strategies to help solve this fiscal gap that we saw on the previous slide. And so our process on that, and I'll be talking more about that as we go through this tonight, is that we've identified some initial strategies that we want to do a deeper dive into, and we're about to embark on doing that. As we start analyzing those strategies, and I'll talk about the kind of the criteria and matrix that we'll be using to evaluate strategies individually. After we've identified those, we'll start developing what we call budget scenario packages, and we'll talk about that here in a second. After those packages have been identified, those will then be presented to you, as well as the City Council, and we'll get the City Council's ideas about and really the direction about what set of strategies they want to pursue. The concept is that each of those scenario packages will include different budget strategies that all packages will ultimately solve the fiscal gap. They just take different ways of doing it, right? And then the last part of our work, once the council has identified which set of strategies they want to pursue, we'll then draft the comprehensive fiscal sustainability plan, which is really more of a roadmap and implementation action plan that the city can start using to implement the strategies that council has chosen to move forward with. So I've included on here the timing of this. Ultimately, it's going to culminate in both of us, it sounds like, providing a presentation to the council on June 8th. And that's why we're meeting this way, at least tonight, so that we can stay on target and keep moving, because we want to get to the council by June, so that way the council can make the decisions that they need to in preparation for the 2021 budget year, but more importantly, what the next 5 or 6 years hold. As we saw on the previous slide, there's time, but there's not a lot of time to move forward with that. So, any questions kind of about our, objectives of what we're trying to accomplish with this? Okay. Seeing none, let me move on then to kind of our project approach. And I won't take too much time with this, but basically what we've done is we've gone through activity 3 already, and we're in activity 4, where we're identifying the strategies, assessing them, and that will then lead us into doing our analysis and determining what the feasibility is. And not only do we look at the fiscal impact, but we also look at the feasibility of implementation across a whole bunch of different spectrum, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. After we're done with that, as we mentioned, we'll do the fiscal sustainability plan. We're participating in task force meetings already with you and any other community engagement activities, et cetera. So let me just talk a little about what fiscal sustainability planning really means. And it's basically identifying and coming up with this comprehensive set of actions, of policies in some cases, that the city will move forward with that will ultimately bring the city into resolving its fiscal gap without the threat of solvency or default of what they had promised to do in terms of either debt restrictions or other debt covenants or other things along those lines. But bottom line is that trying to avoid really falling off the fiscal cliff. So, and every fiscal sustainability plan that we do is unique to each of the agencies. We may take a similar approach, but ultimately the strategies need to reflect the culture of the community, the culture of the organization, the services that you provide, et cetera. And so, so you're not seeing a cookie-cutter approach with us in terms of what those strategies are. There may be some strategies that we've identified that are very pertinent to Ken Moore that may have been used by other cities, and we'll talk through those. And some of them may be like, wow, we never thought about that. Other cases, it's like, yeah, okay, we've done that already. But each fiscal sustainability plan needs to be unique based on the community. And so that in-depth analysis that we do and ultimately coming up with this implementation action plan, we look at these strategies across 4 different categories. And the first 3, and this is on slide 8 for those of you that are audio participants, my apologies on that, not saying that earlier, is that the first 3 strategies that we try to focus on will be to maintain service levels to the fullest extent possible. And those include expenditure controls and cost shifts. I'll explain a little bit of what each of these mean here in a second. Service delivery alternatives, that changes the way that we're doing things, but trying to do it in a way that costs less. Revenue enhancements, clearly try to find greater resources to support the city in its maintaining its existing service levels. And if the combination of those 3, either from the initial analysis or from an actuality of moving forward with some of the implementation and they're not viable, then the city may have to, short of finding other strategies that may work, we'll have to look at service level reduction. And I think that there's a common desire by the council, by staff, and probably by you as well, and all the other community members, is to try to maintain service levels to the fullest extent possible. So that's what we're trying to focus on as we go through this. Let me go over to slide 9, and I'll pause for a minute for questions. This slide will basically kind of talk a little bit more about what each of these are. The first category of expenditure controls and cost shifts really is looking at trying to pinch the penny to be more cost effective and cost efficient with how the general fund is operating, or trying to find ways where the costs that are currently being borne by the general fund may be able to be borne by other sources, whether it's other types of funding sources like gas tax revenues, REIT, those types of things, or it could also mean shifting some of the cost responsibilities to other parties, to maybe third parties. So we'll talk about that as we go through some of the strategies. The second is the service delivery changes, and that's really looking at opportunities for perhaps contracting for services, sharing services with other agencies, other communities, public-private partnerships. All of those are ways to try to provide the same services that we're providing today, but finding a different way to do it that's more cost-effective, and trying to maintain that service level to the fullest extent possible. One of the typical examples that we see in local government is looking at at law enforcement services and looking at shared services like you're doing already with King County. Some people think, well, gosh, we gave up local control, and it all depends on what the teeth are that are within that agreement. But the bottom line is that you're trying to maintain those service levels as much as you can by finding a more cost-effective way of doing that. Third area, revenue enhancements. You've already asked questions about that. We've talked about that in our first meeting. That's just trying to find new resources or increasing the resources that are available to be able to provide services. And then, of course, the last area is service level reductions. Any questions on any of those issues? Okay. So let me talk a little bit about then how do we go through assessing these budget strategies. And what we do is we look at a couple of areas, and one of them is how difficult is it to implement this strategy? So let's say an agency is deciding that it wants to, share services for police services where they already have an existing police department, but you don't have that, but they want to look at maybe doing a shared service concept. We'll take a look at each of these areas. What's the potential for community opposition to that? Where the community members just saying, you know what, this is not something that we want to move forward with. We don't want to go towards. Or maybe it's like, yeah, no, everybody's fine with doing that, no issue. We'll look at technical and operational difficulties of implementation. Sometimes that raises legal issues that may be there as well. So legal is another facet that may need to be looked at. But bottom line is, how difficult will it be to implement these from a technical and an operational perspective? We'll look at the timing. Maybe a great idea may provide a lot of fiscal benefit, but it's going to take 10 years and it's too late. So we'll look at the timing. We'll also look at the disruptive impact that it has, not only on existing service delivery and services that are provided, but as well as the impact that it has on the city organization. The impact that it has on the community is assessed through the first one of the community opposition piece, just framed a little differently. This last one is more on the city organization as a whole, as an organization, and how difficult will it be in implementing that strategy. All of those then are juxtaposed against this concept of fiscal impact. And that's really demonstrated on slide 11, which is, we put it kind of into this matrix where we look at fiscal impact across the horizontal and the difficulty of implementation across the vertical. So if you have an idea or a strategy that ends up generating a significant amount of fiscal impact, in this case, the example here is over $100,000. And it's not very difficult to implement based on those strategies or the criteria that I talked about earlier. That's low-hanging fruit. That's the definition of low-hanging fruit, right? The high fiscal impact, not very much difficulty in implementing, you can move forward with it, right? It gets a lot more sticky as you start getting it, making it where it's a little bit more difficult to implement, or where a strategy might have some fiscal impact, maybe more moderate level. But, and maybe if it's not too hard to do, you still may want to move forward with that. But as you start getting a little bit more difficult, that's where it starts sliding into these yellow and pink/red categories, where it's like, do you really want to move forward with that? So we look at those, and in fact, the strategies that we'll be talking about tonight, in our overview, if we see something that has very little fiscal impact and it's just going to be a bear to implement, we're not even going to analyze it. We're just going to do a broad, discussion about that and say, you know what, it's only going to be about $25,000 and it's just going to be too much opposition to move forward with it. It's just something that it doesn't make sense to really pursue any further. And so that's kind of how we look at all of that, all of these strategies to really analyze whether it will help bring sustainability to the community. So let me then talk about these strategies. We take the strategies, likely those that have great, good, or moderate potential, so those that might be in the green and yellow categories on slide 11. And as we move to slide 12, we will then start assembling those strategies based on our analysis and our projection of what the fiscal impact could be along a spectrum of different scenario packages. And I've given you some samples, and this is not necessarily what it's going to look like for Kenmore, but it might, that range anywhere from those scenarios that rely heavily on revenue enhancements to those on the other, that's scenario 1 in this case, to scenario 4 that may be more stronger on expenditure reduction strategies. And that way the council has an opportunity to be able to see a spectrum of different choices that they may wish to exercise. The concept is that each of these strategies, each of these packages will bring fiscal sustainability to the community, but it's just different approaches to get there. And so you see some examples in this slide about, the strong revenue enhancement will rely more on, let's say, tax measures or increasing on taxes or charges for services, with maybe a slight amount of expenditure reduction. But then as you start moving from scenario 1 to scenario 4, you start seeing more of a blend where you're introducing different concepts of maybe service delivery changes or expenditure controls, cost shifts that we talked about before. Maybe there might be some slight service level reductions to get where it needs to be. And there would be a blend of some revenues, whether they're more moderate or light. But it gives an opportunity for the council to have almost a menu of choices that they can look at and see and understand when they all come together. Does it get them to where they need to be? So those are the ways that we address it, and what we will be addressing it when we put our report together, not only for your review, but then ultimately for the city council. So before I move on to the strategies, any additional questions about this concept and this approach? Now, just because we're using technology here doesn't mean you have to be quiet. So if you have a question, please, that's why we wanted to do this meeting this way, right? So.
Can I ask
All right.
a question? This is
Yeah.
not a question about strategy, but about are we recording this session tonight?
Yes. On my side, I'm recording it to the cloud.
Okay.
And then you're also recording it, I believe, on YouTube.
Yeah.
You're streaming on YouTube, right? So,
Yeah, and this is Rob. For those who are watching via YouTube video stream, you can be following along in these slides. If you click on the agenda, there's a link on the agenda, and you can see these slides as we're going through them. And Steve is mentioning the slide number, so you can follow along as he mentions the slide number. If you're having any difficulty out there, just send me an email, rcarlindsay@kenmorewa.gov, and I'll be watching my emails during this meeting.
The Zoom meeting will be on our website later.
Yeah, the Zoom meeting will be on our website later, as will the video stream.
That's right. Good. Okay. So let me move into, just make sure there are no questions. Let me move in then into the initial strategies that we've identified thus far, and the work that we've done thus far. And these strategies are based on a few things. They're based on the interviews that we had with city staff, the city council, reviewing a whole slew of documents that Joanne prepared for us, similar to those documents that you all have requested and or seen as well in preparation for your work. It's also based on our experience in doing this for several years in local governments across the United States, on the West Coast, and in Washington State. And so there are some strategies that may be like, well, where'd that come from? Other strategies like, oh, okay, I can see that, how that's clearly pertinent to us. So as we go through these, and again, just doing more the 15, 20,000 foot level rather than getting on the ground level on these. We want to make sure that you understand kind of what some of the things are that we're doing, and what we have learned from our interactions thus far, and what we think would be viable options, potential options, for Kenmore, subject to our further analysis. So again, I'm going to go through from left to right, as we're on slide 14 here, from expenditure controls and cost shifts on through service level reductions, and share with you what each of the strategies are in each of those areas. So as I move to slide 15, this is the area of expenditure controls and cost shifts. And again, are there ways that we could be more cost effective in how we're spending money today? or are there opportunities for us to look at shifting some of the costs to perhaps other sources? The first item that's on this list is an example of that, which is that the school resource officers that the city provides through its contract with KCSO, there's a potential opportunity that the city could have to look to work with the school district to shift some of those costs to them. So that's one strategy. The second one is conducting an organizational assessment. Some of you may be familiar with the lean approach, the lean concept, which is really trying to look at efficiencies and best practices in order to provide better or same levels of service more efficiently, more cost effectively. And so that is another piece that is done. That's not the work that we're doing as part of the fiscal sustainability plan. As some of you know that may have had, organizational assessments, lean assessments, business process reengineering, a whole bunch of different names for those types of things done. It's a pretty exhaustive process, and then ultimately, hopefully, it leads to cost savings for the organization or improved services or both. Third area is the city has an agreement right now that allows the use of some of the parks and ball fields at Bastyr University. The question becomes then, is there an opportunity to shift those costs to others that are actually using those resources? Cost allocation plan is something that local government does, and I think we may have talked about this in January, and maybe Joanne has had a conversation with you since about the city has certain administrative costs, overhead costs. Some of you may be very familiar with, right, in your walk, that are more appropriately shifted, and that cost really needs to be identified to the cost center to which it operates. And so the cost for finance, the cost for the city manager's office, legal counsel, et cetera, need to be shifted to those that really are paying for the use of their services. And so cities do that through a cost allocation plan. It's basically an entry that occurs in the general ledger that shifts those costs from one to another. And it's been a while since the city has reviewed in detail its cost allocation plan, although we're seeing a lot of the work that they're doing in that area is in alignment with best practices. So that's an area. That's what the cost allocation plan is. As you may be aware, Kenmore offers a business incubator program, and there may be opportunities to be able to shift those costs to either other revenue sources or to those that are actually using those facilities a little bit more, to have them start bearing a little bit more of the cost of that.
And Steve, I can speak to that if you want.
Yep.
So we're pretty unique as a city. I don't know of another city around here that has an incubator, or at least not like we do, a city-sponsored, city-subsidized incubator. That incubator has been in operation since about 2013, and we've run a lot of Kenmore startup businesses through it over the years, and it's not just a space that we provide. It's also we provide classes and advice and consulting and to help the businesses get off the ground. We have a incubator consultant who has a lot of expertise in startups and how to create a business plan and all those things, that advises the incubator clients and also provides classes. And what we do is we offer very inexpensive rent for these new startup companies. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's like, I don't know, $300 or $400 a month per desk or cubicle. And so the city has to actually subsidize the overall operation of the incubator because those rents don't cover it. It varies from year to year, but our net subsidy is probably around $90,000 a year to the incubator. So we collect rent from the clients, and I think we collect a few other fees from the clients. Plus And then on the expense side, we have to pay the consultant, and of course, we have to pay rent for the space that we lease there. And do you all know where the incubator is physically?
It's above Karen Brewery, right?
That's right. Yep, it's right on the corner of 73rd Avenue and Bothell Way.
Rob, are there some examples of businesses that are in operation today that were helped with the incubator?
Yeah.
Success stories?
Yeah.
Yes. So one is Red Barn Engineering. They started in the incubator, and now they're in some office space over by the post office. And they're just growing exponentially. Another one is also an engineering firm, but it's, I forget the kind of engineering that it is, but they're also a business that is, looks like they're in the process of moving out of the incubator and into some office space on 175th Avenue. I can't remember if it's office space or more kind of like warehouse space, but anyway, those are two examples. But the problem is that most of our incubator graduates have not been able to find good office space in Kenmore. And it's been a kind of a chicken versus the egg dilemma, because Kenmore is lacking in good office space. And so what do you do first? Do you build the office space and hope they come, or do you build the demand for the office space? And having an incubator helps create a little bit of demand. So anyway, but I would say most of the incubator clients that graduate have not been able to locate in Kenmore. Many of them live in Kenmore or live in the area, but they haven't actually been able to get a foothold in Kenmore.
So question, I guess the primary question, and I think you're alluding to it here, is the idea of providing the subsidy to the space and providing the classes is that you inspire these and enable these business people to start a business in Kenmore, and then the return on that investment is that the business will be located in Kenmore and that will generate revenue. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's a general idea. And then there's also kind of an intangible that goes with it, and that is the strong beacon signal that we're sending that Kenmore is open for business and we're laying out the red carpet for new businesses. You can't put a dollar figure on that, but that's also been a benefit of the incubator. And we've gotten recognition in the region for it, and we've gotten press coverage and things like that that have helped send that message about Kenmore. And the incubator has provided that exposure for us.
That makes sense. Most incubators that I have been exposed to or familiar with have some kind of, the subsidies or the capital or the, whatever resources that are provided have some kind of like equity, albeit small equity portion that the resources that are put into the business represent. And therefore, if the business does very well as a result of the incubator and as a result of that investment, that there is a more direct financial return, even if they don't end up staying in the location of Kenmore, but there's still kind of a tie to that. Has that ever been considered for the Kenmore incubator?
Yeah, Nancy Owsley, our assistant city manager, is in charge of economic development. That's one of her jobs here, and she manages the incubator. And she has begun the path. She's at the very beginning stages of shifting more in that direction. So looking for investors or a nonprofit or the creation of a nonprofit or something that can take over as much of that subsidy as possible.
Yeah, because I would think that again, the investment, I could see it going two ways. Like if they do end up finding office space in Kenmore and they start the business in Kenmore, and we kind of have that as part of the economic growth plan, and it's successful in that regard, then jobs well done, and send them on their way to graduation. But if they don't find office space in Kenmore and they move somewhere else, then I could see some kind of like financial mechanism to get back the investment, so to speak, so that when they have the ability to pay, or they are a successful business, they can sort of repay the investment that Kenmore had put into their business, and it's not just kind of lost as those things go. So something to consider, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Another piece of the incubator, this was added a year or two after the brick and mortar incubator got established, but another piece of it is the what we call the virtual incubator, and what that is it helps Kenmore businesses that might be like home-based, and they may be already existing and even a little bit established, and for a small fee, they can access all of the services of the incubator except for the brick and mortar space. And so we've had a number of Kenmore businesses that are physically located here utilize the virtual incubator. But again, they were already here to begin with, and they're still here. So.
Okay. The final item that was on this list was the concept of, looking for revenue share or greater revenue share of rec organizations like, adult or youth sports organizations, for example, that use city parks or others that might use it. And so, again, it would be an opportunity for the city to share some of those costs with those that are actually, using those facilities.
Yeah, Steve.
Any questions before we move to the next one or comments?
Yeah, can I speak
Rob?
to that last one as well? So this was actually an idea of one of my coworkers, Rita, one of our recreation coordinator. Here's the situation. We often have for-profit entities running programs in our parks, and Lynn, you probably know way more about this than I do, but like, for example, we have a group called Skyhawks, and they run summer youth camps at Rhododendron Park, and we get 10% of their revenues, and Rita tells me from her research that other cities that allow these kind of groups get closer to 20, 30%. Another example is we have a kayak concessionaire at Log Boom Park, and again, we get 10% of their revenues for the privilege of locating there at Log Boom Park. Now we want our public to connect with the water, and we want to make it easy for that to happen, and we don't want the fees to be prohibitively high. And so, that's something to consider as well. But if other cities around here are charging more, then that's worth taking a look at, I think.
Yeah, the standard percent is a little bit higher depending on the situation, but you can always implement over time so that it's not too big of an impact to the businesses, thus discouraging them to stop doing business. So that's a real possibility. I was going to ask just real quickly, so it says ball fields and park lease of Bastyr University, so you're leasing those fields, not just the St. Edward State Park field?
Yeah, that's right. So we do not have any sort of a ball field lease at St. Edward State Park, but we do lease the 2 baseball diamonds at Bastyr University, and that's $50,000 a year. So back in 2011, when the city entered into this lease, we put a couple $100,000 into improvements, and then from then on, we've paid Bastyr $50,000 a year. And in addition, Bastyr collects revenue from the various leagues for reserving and playing on those fields. Bastier's responsible for all the maintenance, so they collect the fees from the leagues, and they collect the 50,000 from us, and then Bastier maintains the fields for us. And so one thought is maybe the leagues should be paying more of that 50,000 and paying all or some of it.
Yes.
One thing to point out is the ball field is not just available for league play. When leagues don't have it reserved, the public is welcome to play on it any time.
Do you track any utilization outside of the official leagues and the official groups? Is there any kind of understanding how much these are used by the public?
No, we don't have.
I imagine that would be difficult to track, but
yeah.
Okay.
If it's at all helpful, in Kirkland, we've done a pretty extensive ball field benchmarking study over the last year or two. We'd be happy to share any data that might be useful for you.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that'd be great. Good. Let me move on to the next area of service delivery changes. And in this area, there's some potential for some strategies that could be helpful to the city. This first one is this concept of trying to shift some of the maintenance costs for Log Boom Waterfront Park in two ways. One is doing a request for proposal process, that's what an RFP means, for maintenance services that could be done perhaps at a lower cost and or allow the city to then focus on the other commitments that it has for maintenance. The other option is looking at a concession agreement for the operations of the park where an operator would come in, would not own the park, but would take responsibility for running it and operating it. Similar to how you'd have for like a municipal golf course, for example, where somebody else comes in and actually runs it. In this case, the city would then get either they would be responsible for all the maintenance, and or there would be some revenue sharing for that concession agreement. So that's what that item is talking about. The second area is looking at organizational structure changes within the city. This would change the way that services are delivered by basically, I wouldn't say moving the boxes, but using organizational analysis to determine how there might be opportunities to reduce overlap and be more cost efficient in how the city is providing services with its different departments. Right now, the city contracts with SCORE for South County agency that provides jail services. It's a long road. It's an hour and a half sometimes drive to get somebody that has been arrested to the jail site. And so this would be looking at potential opportunities for other jail providers in other cities that are in the north area that would make it more cost effective either for putting officers on the streets more and or would be just more cost effective in terms of an operation that's less less costly with some cost sharing with another facility on the north side. Two areas that relate into the maintenance area is always the best practice for cities to look at making sure that they're providing services that are the most cost effective, and one area is vehicle maintenance. Right now the city actually works with the utility district to provide that service. Are there other options that might be more cost effective? I know the city's very pleased with its relationship with NUD in providing those services, but always the question is there an opportunity where that might their shop labor rates might be lower at another place as opposed to NUD? Same thing with certain areas of parks and landscape maintenance. that could be revisited or looked at that would help provide more cost effectiveness by looking at either private sector or other agencies that might be able to do that. The concept when you're always looking at doing these shared services concepts that we're talking about in here is the city will always need to have some owner of that service, right? The city is not privatizing it. They're not getting rid of the service. Instead, what they're doing is they're finding a more cost-effective way to provide that. It may be through contracts with other agencies, whether they be private or public. And so you're always going to need to ensure that you incorporate some form of project management with the city resources that are still left to oversee and ensure that that work is being done to the standards that have been established by council policy. Another area is, and this would be more perhaps future, but the park capital improvement projects that are currently in the long-range capital improvement project plan or CIP plan, perhaps looking at those and looking at and changing the character of those to more low maintenance uses instead of doing a very vegetation-rich, park with a lot of, benches and baseball fields or other things like that. Instead, looking at more open space areas that could still serve the recreational needs of the community, but would be at a much lower cost long term. And that also then kind of translates to the last area on this slide, which is, when there are any new sidewalks that are being built. As you know, there's been a lot of new sidewalks that have been built over the years, and the city takes responsibilities for those typically. Are there opportunities to look at more low maintenance hardscapes or softscapes that will still meet what the objectives are in these areas, or especially like a medians as well, but there would be more at a lower cost to maintain on a long-term basis. So those are the service delivery changes that we've identified thus far. Any questions, clarifications, thoughts? Okay.
I think they're all really good ideas.
Okay.
On jail services, as Steve mentioned, we have to drive our inmates all the way down to Des Moines. We could drive them to King County Jail in downtown, but it's way more expensive than the jail in Des Moines. And so we would love to have a North King County, South Snohomish County alternative. We used to send our inmates to the Snohomish County Jail, but they had some problems, and so they had to boot us and the other contract cities out for a while, and they're not willing to take us on yet. And so we're looking at Linwood, and of course we're looking at Kirkland, but Kirkland's not ready for us yet. So yeah, we're definitely keeping our eyes peeled for a better jail alternative that's closer to home.
Yeah.
Okay.
Steve, this is Jim.
The third area.
Steve, can I just jump in for a second? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt the flow, but I just wanted to point out, supposedly we're going to have like 5 more minutes with you, but the questions are really good, so I would just encourage that as we go through the rest of the buckets, everybody keep asking questions, because we really can then have till about another 20, 25 minutes with you. And I just want to make sure that for Lou and Darlene, since you're just on audio, I hope that you're being able to track everything too. I appreciate that Steve's calling out the numbers of the slides, but just want to make sure you guys are following along too.
Right, yeah. Looks like actually Darlene's able to see what's going on because she's using her computer, but anyways.
Yeah, I can see.
Good. Hey, there she is.
She's been with us all along. It's kind of, for me, it's kind of like stalking, Darlene, It's like, okay, you can see us, but we can't see you. Same thing with you, and Mike and Elizabeth and Lou. Well, all of you are stalking. Okay, here we go. Revenue. And we've kind of categorized these into 2 areas. First is, what are the revenue options that the city council can move forward with, also known as councilmanic options, versus those that require voter approval. And so the first area of those that would have authority to move forward with would include utility taxes of either increasing those to the maximum that are allowed under state law, or even new taxes on water, stormwater, solid waste, and/or video services that are currently not done but are allowable under state law. In the area of property taxes, we talked about this in our first meeting and probably had subsequent conversations about that, that the city has a certain amount of banked capacity that it has not implemented from years gone by, where it passed on doing any type of an increase. You know, the city has the opportunity to do a 1% increase each year without needing to go to voter approval. Council in the past has sat on that and decided not to implement that. And so there's still some bank capacity that's available, so that's another option. Admissions tax, this is a new type of tax for Kenmore, and this would be something that could be implemented on such amenities as the golf course or even performing arts, that would require those that provide those services, that use those services, to pay a tax for the ability to use those services. Some places do it on movie theaters and a whole bunch of other types of, you know, amenities where people go and they use the facilities for enjoyment, for a lack of a better term. Actually, state law defines enjoyment in the tax area. Lodging tax is another option that is available. The catch with lodging tax, though, is that it has to be used for travel and tourism costs. And so to the extent that the general fund is bearing any of that, and its economic development initiatives or other things might be helpful to pay for that. So the fiscal impact of this is questionable, but it could provide an opportunity for enhancing the ability of the city to be a destination location. Let's face it, you know, the waterfront park might be an excellent, you know, opportunity to do that and to help defray some of the costs that are associated with that park. Business and operations.
Really quick on the lodging. So that can be capital or maintenance.
Yes, it's allowable for capital or operating. Right.
So what other cities, do they put it in capital or operating, or does it matter for the lodging tax with the new lodge coming up? Does that make a difference which bucket it goes into?
Well, only to the extent that it doesn't matter what bucket it goes into, and the city, and you know, Joanne as the finance director can make some determinations as to how it wants to account for those. The question becomes, in order for this fiscal sustainability plan for it to have impact, does it help defray costs that the general fund might otherwise have to absorb had that tax not been available to pay for those expenses? So, for example, let's say that Waterfront Park is a viable option for a lodging tax to be used for some tourism needs. Instead of the general fund having to contribute to that because all other resources have been tapped, this lodging tax could help pay for that. So in that situation, it's helping to defray costs that the general fund might otherwise have to bear.
Yeah, and along those lines, if the city were to implement a lodging tax, my recommendation would be that it would help offset mainly our events that we put on. So the fireworks show, which we do get sponsors for, and the concerts at St. Edward State Park, and the movies at the town square, and the holiday tree lighting and other events. So I think lodging tax could help offset those types of activities.
This is Mike. Do we have any idea, or would you be developing some estimates of what the potential revenue would be from each one of these options?
Yes. As part of our analysis, we're going to be looking at fiscal impact and then the feasibility considerations, that the whole, you know, difficulty of implementation stuff I was talking about earlier. But clearly with the fiscal impact, and we'll give some gradations of that too, to the extent that there might be some different options. For example, utility taxes. If the city decided to implement a 5% versus a 6%, we'll be able to give what the impact is of 1% and what the different choices might be there.
Great, thank you.
Yep. That also is true with the next item, which is the B&O tax, which is, that there would be an opportunity for the city to implement a business and occupations tax. Again, the city could decide how it wants to create that tax structure and what the amount of the tax would be to levy, and so therefore there might be some, high, medium, low type of options based on what solution might be chosen. A user fee study is that concept where the city charges for certain fees and charges such as building permits, planning permits, those types of things, and so encroachment permits. And so it's been a while since the city has done a comprehensive user fee study, and that will then determine how close is the city to achieving full cost recovery of those services. The city is not in business to make money, so it cannot charge more than what the cost is of providing that service. And so conducting user fee study and then assessing that to adjust those fees at or near full cost recovery is a viable option for the city. The next item is about park usage and concession fees, and is there might be an opportunity to be able to implement a fee for the revenue generating use of parks. We almost touched on that a little bit earlier when we were talking about the use of parks and the expenditure controls and cost shifts area. Right now, the hangar, which is a city property, right across the street from City Hall.
Hey, Steve, do you mind if I give an example of that parks usage concession fee?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so earlier we mentioned concessionaires that are in the park on a regular basis, like all summer long or something, and collecting a percentage of their revenue. What we're talking about here, parks usage concession fee, is we have some groups that just come in and pop in for a day or 2 or 3 days, and right now they just use the park for free. Like YMCA might come in and for 3 days they'll have a bunch of kayakers at Log Boom Park for a few days, or another nonprofit or for-profit group will bring a bunch of kids to the skate park for a day or two, and right now they don't pay anything. They come and dominate the park, but they don't pay anything. And Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's fairly common for cities to charge a user fee for groups that come in and take up a section of a park. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, standard business practice.
Yeah, we see almost every city we work with charges, for use of a park, especially exclusive use.
Absolutely.
For a period of time. Yeah.
And these groups don't necessarily have exclusive use, but they come in and they definitely impact the park for sure. Sure,
right. Two other options that council could move forward with themselves by council action is, the city hall meeting rooms are sometimes, used, and there's, supposed to be advance notice, and if people don't give advance notice, some cities will charge kind of a late fee or a fee for that. Again, so that's an option. The final option here is this concept of photo traffic enforcement. Many of you are probably very familiar with what that might look like and what that might mean. The concept with that would be to fund public safety and roadway improvements through photo enforcement technology, and there's a whole variety of different ways that could be done. A lot of people think red light cameras, and yeah, okay, I get that. That's one option. But there are several other opportunities for photo enforcement technology.
In Washington State, there's 2 ways to do it. One is red light, and the other is school zones. There's a bill in the legislature that I think is about to be passed or might be passed that'll allow the city of Seattle to do photo enforcement in bus lanes, bus-only lanes. But other than that, we can't just put up a photo enforcement on just any road. It has to be either for red light running or school zones.
Right. 3 areas that require voter approval are, number 1, a levy lid lift above the 1% that the council would have the opportunity to do every year. So if there was anything that was above that, and that could be done in two ways. It could be done as a general purpose tax that doesn't specify what it will be used for, or it can be done as a special purpose tax. In this case, public safety might be one option that would be very well received by the community. It could also be parks, and open space areas as well. So there's some options there with respect to that. The second one is a sales tax, where the city does have the ability for a 0.2% increase in the tax rate, and that money would then go towards helping to fund the transportation benefit district funding, which is basically helping to offset road improvements and other areas for transportation initiatives within and through the city. And then the other option is to create a new special district called a Metropolitan Park District, where it would transfer operations of maintenance of the parks to that other district. There are a whole bunch of rules that are established under state law in terms of how you set that up. If the borders are contiguous with the city council could elect to be the board, or could then decide to either appoint or have that board be separate as an entity, and a special election would be held for that. The concept there, though, of where that helps the city is that that district then becomes a taxing district and has the ability to set its own levy. And to the extent that the city has offloaded its park maintenance responsibilities to that separate district, but maintains its levy as it currently is, then there would be cost savings. Otherwise, if the city dollar for dollar were to reduce its levy as much as the district is increasing it, to keep the tax burden the same on property owners in the city, then there would be a net wash and it would be a net zero impact. So the only extent to which a park district or setting up a special district like this is of benefit to a community from a fiscal sustainability planning perspective is where the city would choose to still charge a tax levy that is higher, at least net, than the cost of avoidance that they've experienced through offloading park maintenance operations. Any questions, thoughts, feedback?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of the items there that we just really have to very seriously think about, and they're pretty good money, like utility taxes, the admission tax, the banked capacity, the fees for concessions, non-resident fees. I think those are all something that really should be done.
I would agree.
Just kind of looking forward to your feasibility, these councilmanic ones, since the council can do it by itself, I mean, is there other considerations besides sorry, let me gather my thoughts here. So the councilmanic ones, like obviously the council can make their own decision, and there's the administrative stuff, but like, is there also consideration for like implementing a utility tax or an admissions tax or things like that? Do you guys also look at the public, even though the public is not weighing in with a vote, but there may be a public perception repercussion to the council based on these things? Is that considered?
The technical term is abso-dang-lutely, that's for sure. The council would have to weigh all of those different, factors of, what is the burden that the taxpayer is going to have. Who are the taxpayers? Are they people that come into the city from other places, or are they ones that live within the community? All those different types of things have to be taken into consideration in any councilmanic option. Just because it doesn't have to go to a vote, which could make it easier to do, doesn't mean that there still won't be pain and suffering for moving forward with something like that. In some cases, like utility tax, the utility tax is subject by state law, is subject to referendum. So if the council, let's say, were to decide to implement a utility tax for water, let's say, or stormwater services. The voters could go through a process of a referendum to put that on a ballot to overturn it, and it would require a majority vote to overturn something like that. So all those different things have to be considered clearly by a council before it would want to move forward with any of these recommendations. And our analysis will take that into consideration in terms of feasibility.
Yeah, this is Rob. Another thing about utility taxes, a couple things, is the cost of the utility tax is passed directly on to the ratepayer. It's not absorbed by the utility. In fact, on your utility bill, you will see a City of Kenmore utility tax and the amount as its own called out line item. So the utility company is under no obligation to absorb it or anything like that. The other thing is the utility tax is generally viewed as a regressive tax. It folks that are on that have low incomes, would pay a greater percentage of their income towards a utility tax than higher income households. And so some cities have recognized that, and they create a utility tax rebate or discount. And Lynn, I think Kirkland probably has one. I know Bothell has a utility tax discount for low income. So there's some administration costs that go into administering a discount program. It's going to take staff time and finance staff time and everything to help process those utility tax discounts. This was a long time ago, but I was in a city 15 years ago now that had a utility tax, and they offered a discount or a rebate. And the way the city that I worked for did it was the ratepayers would have to come in and show a bunch of paperwork showing how they're low income, and then the city would sort through the paperwork and say, yeah, you're low income, and then they would write them a check for $20 or $30. And it was a lot of burden both on the ratepayer and on the city for a $20 or $30 check. So that city, it was University Place, they eventually just abandoned it, and they said, look, there's plenty of other discount and rebate programs out there. Puget Sound Energy, for example, offers a low-income utility tax discount and they contract with HopeLink to administer that. But you have to be really low income to qualify for that one. So there's a whole bunch of policy things to think about, and what level of low income do you want to offer the rebate to, and what are the administrative costs, and all those things that go into offering a utility tax discount.
I would personally make a pitch for the stormwater fees, and the reason I say that, and I'm not an expert in this area by any stretch, so Steve, I'm sure you would know all the details, but I believe stormwater funding can be used for parks, specifically wetlands and buffers and whatnot, and Kenmore has a lot of that in its parks, so I wonder if that's an opportunity.
We'll definitely take a look at that. Talking on mute. Okay, good. Final area. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Okay. The final area is service level reduction. So the first three areas that we just talked about, to the extent that the combination of those are unable to solve the fiscal gap that we talked about earlier, the city would then also need to look, and or in combination with, we need to look at service level reduction. And these are a whole bunch of different areas, and of course, nobody really wants to go this route, but these are options that need to be explored. Right now the city manages its roadways, its pavement. through a pavement management study that identifies a pavement condition index for its roads. The city could decide to lower its street pavement standards to a lower level than where it is right now, and that would allow the general fund to not have to fund backfill the needs. Or another way to look at that is that the street pavement program would have to live within its means in terms of dedicated revenues that we get from gas tax and all the other different types of sources for road repairs. Another area is to reduce street landscaping service areas and also any street beautification initiatives that the city might have. Reducing recreation services back to their levels in 2018 prior to the hiring of a part-time position in that area. The city has a variety of different consulting contracts that it enters into, president company included, fully aware of that. And so, the concept would be for the city to potentially look at reducing some of those consulting contracts that they rely on to provide backfill in terms of either communications or engineering services or trying to garner support on the federal level. And so those are options. These next two concepts really come into the area of the capital improvement project plan, which includes some new park facilities and new sidewalks. Maybe the city doesn't do those until it's able to identify an ongoing and reliable maintenance funding source to be able to pay for those. And Frank, that's a policy that a lot of cities are now starting to implement, especially those that are experiencing fiscal challenges in their forecast, is they will basically they will not approve a capital improvement project unless it either reduces the city's maintenance costs and or they find another option or another solution to be able to help it pay for itself long term, at least the maintenance side of it long term. Reducing travel, training, conferences is always an option that the city would could look at. One of the things that's unique to Kenmore in the area, although I've had experience personally in working for a city that did this, is funding human services agencies. And Rob could speak to it a little bit more, but it's the question of, the division of services, who's really responsible for providing those types of services. And, if the city is providing money or funding for that, there's a benefit for the community, but is the city really required to provide that funding? And so that's an area that could be touched. One final area, and then I'll open it up, is there's a suggestion that came from staff on, looking at park restrooms in the winter months, and some of them are hardly ever used. And why are we still doing maintenance if they're hardly ever used? And maybe you make a decision to close some of those parks. Not the parks, but the restrooms at least during the winter months when you see very little foot traffic in that area. So, any questions, thoughts, comments on those?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Lynn's had a few reactions, and I'm wondering if anybody else does.
Lynn, I saw you unmuted. Go ahead.
I'm waiting. I don't want to dominate the conversation. There's several on here that I just really don't think we should consider. Unless the city is expending exorbitant amounts of money on travel, training, and conferences, that's just kind of a no-go, because we really want Kenmore staff to be up on the latest practices in the industry so that they can manage the city in the best way possible. And quite frankly, it's just not a lot of money. And I think, as we heard in the presentation earlier, reducing street pavement standards is really just going to cost us a lot more money in the long run. I think your strategies on previous slides about looking at efficient ways of doing landscaping through design is a great idea. There are low maintenance plants, all those types of things that can help. But stopping or significantly reducing, maintaining what's already there, again, ultimately in the long run, that actually just costs us more money.
Hey, Steve, you're on mute again.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. Talking to myself, I was having a great conversation. It was so inspiring what I was saying. That street engineers look at, either pay me now or pay me later, right? But that said, the standard to which you are maintaining your roads, are you expecting everybody to drive on glass? Or is there an expectation that perhaps there can be some alligatoring, maybe not potholing, especially with the very wet climate we have in the Pacific Northwest. But there are, those are clearly questions that will have to be, addressed with any type of a change in service standards like that. Yep.
Anybody else?
Any other questions, reflections?
This is Rob. On the reduced recreation services to 2018 levels, just to remind you, what happened is during this biennium budget discussions back in 2018, the city council added a halftime recreation person. And our recreation model is we leverage other agencies to provide recreation services in city parks. So we don't directly provide rec services, but we try to get other groups like Skyhawks I mentioned earlier, and of course the sports leagues and the Kenmore Waterfront Activities Center and all those to provide programming. And the council thought it could be better managed if you had one person and bringing it all into one kind of point of contact to manage all those groups. And the council also wanted the position to bring in more groups to provide even more recreation programs, which the new position has indeed done. If this position were to go away, then the new programs, the new groups that the person has brought in, those would be reduced, and then we'd go back to the 2018 way of doing it, which is the peanut butter way, meaning dealing with all those recreation providers would be spread out across the organization. So, for example, before our rec coordinator, I was the person directly responsible for dealing with Kenmore Waterfront Activities Center, and somebody else was responsible for dealing with Skyhawks, and somebody else had responsibility for dealing with the Little Leagues, and it was just spread out across the organization. So with this new halftime rec coordinator position, she's been able to be the main and central point of contact. Makes it a little easier for the public to navigate. And then like I said, she's also been able to grow programs. Again, I just want to repeat what our model is, and that is we don't directly provide rec services. We get other entities to do it for us. And we do two main things. We say, hey, look, if you come and provide recreation services here in our city, we'll offer two things. We'll provide the venue, and we'll help you promote your programs through the city's media and other communication channels. So that's the way our model's been worked. The one exception is the city does directly provide rec services when it comes to events. We directly run the fireworks show and the holiday tree lighting and the concerts and the movies and those types of things. But other than that, we rely on nonprofits and for-profits to run rec in Kenmore.
On the rec coordinator position, is that person's list of responsibilities obviously includes being the point person for the communications and when and where and things like that. But does that person also consider the cost? Like, we talked about you know, the revenue share. We talked about some of these arrangements where we may be lower than comparable cities or something like that. Is this person also responsible for like understanding those revenue shares, or does that still remain with?
And the ideas to increase those revenue shares came from her. so
yeah, because you know, kind of going back to what Lynn was saying, this seems like another situation where cost savings could turn into increased costs or decreased revenue if we don't have the resources to manage those relationships and those programs. Then we could find ourselves with mismanaged programs and not getting the value, not only not getting the value of the recreation to its maximum capacity, but also not getting the benefit of the revenue share or managing the associated costs, the maintenance costs, things like that. So I feel like this is just another situation where it's like, yeah, they may be some easy dollars to cut that person out, but there are ramifications associated with it that would have a financial impact as well.
Yeah, and kind of the non-financial is kind of the level of professionalism that she's brought to our organization. You know, she's a rec professional. She knows what she's doing, whereas all the rest of us are just part-timers. You know, we're that's not our day job. But like, for example, she's produced a really amazing recreation brochure that brings it all into one document, you know, and things like that. So there's definitely been an intangible benefit to having her on board. But, you know, we can't do it all. We can't have everything, obviously, so there's going to we have to make some tough choices. We get that.
And in our analysis, we'll take into consideration the net cost impact, whether it's, you know, negative or, you know, positive. So, yeah, we'll look at those as well. Very briefly, let me just jump to slide 20 for those that are following along on their own slide packet. And I'm not going to...
Hey, can I jump in one more thing, Steve? I'm sorry. If you want to see just an example of our rec coordinators' work, this coming Monday night's City Council meeting agenda, on the consent agenda is a memo from her that talks about the new programs she's added since she started. And so that's this coming Monday night. That agenda is live to the internet as I speak. So you can go click on that tonight and see her memo. She was actually going to come and talk to the council about the work she's done, but she's not going to come now because of the virus, and we just put her memo on the consent agenda.
Good. I wanted to give you a roadmap with good pavement standards in terms of where we're going with our project from here on out. Our next big deliverable to you, of course, will be our draft report for your consideration. But I will be participating with you in a couple of other task force meetings as we hear from the public and do some of the public engagement in terms of their perspectives. But I wanted you to have this so that way you know kind of where we are with the project and what our next steps forward are. So with that, I'll turn it back over to everyone else, and maybe I'll turn off the slide since you have that. So.
Okay, well, it's 8 o'clock. I'm just going to ask one more time if any of the task force members have any reactions or questions of Steve, but then I'm going to turn it over to Lynn because we want to walk you through the balancing act tool. But any other questions or comments real quickly? Okay, and we'll give it over to Joanne.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Hi, I've got to pull up a couple things on the internet here, and then I'll give you a little demo of what I've been thinking about for our public engagement. So to introduce this...
Joanne, I've given you co-host rights, and you'll need to share your screen.
I need to share my screen.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
I can't share it for you.
You can tell me how I might do that.
Green button down at the bottom, share.
I need to get back out of Internet Explorer, I think. Okay, share screen. And, oh, the share. Do you see?
We are seeing it.
Oh, great.
There it is.
Great. There will be another screen too, but I think I'll start here. So months ago, actually last year, when we knew we were going to embark on this financial sustainability project, I was trying to think of what could we do in a public setting that would really engage participants, something that would be fun and colorful and interesting and lively that people would want to participate in. And I can't even remember now how I ran across Balancing Act, but it is an interactive public engagement tool that can communicate financial information to the community users in a colorful and easy to understand simulation mode and get feedback from them as they work through it and make choices. It's something that can be deployed not only on our website, but it could be used in a meeting mode during a public engagement meeting. And I think a really cool feature about the simulations is that we build them based on our actual budget and projections so that everyone is working with real data and real numbers. So on this page, I'm just going to show you a quick demo because right now I am, and then I'll show you ours, but ours is not fully developed or built yet, but this is a quick view of how it might look. I use the word quick loosely here. So you're introduced, as a person logs on, you're introduced with a nice little welcome to Balancing Act. You have a voice, et cetera. You can show your elected officials how you would balance the budget if given the opportunity, and then you can get started. And in this case, there's a budget presented in here that's already balanced, and it says you are balanced. And this isn't quite the view I was hoping for. Let's see. Yeah, how do I minimize the people?
Far left, top bar.
I'm sorry, I'm going to minimize all of you. It still doesn't have the little graphic that I was looking for. So it's not a very good example. Basically, it will show a graphic of a balanced budget with all of the expenditure buckets on one side and all the revenue buckets on another side. And in this case, they're balanced, but they're real numbers. And within each bucket, we can present options for people to consider and then understand how that impacts the budget, and then gives them an opportunity to identify how they might compensate and keep the balanced budget. So if they would like to, for instance, spend more money on firefighters in this instance, and remember, we're balanced. So we asked the question, how many firefighters should the city add to address full staffing for ladder trucks? And if we keep the staffing the same, we're balanced, but if we added 12 new firefighters, that adds $2.3 million to the budget, and suddenly we're in a big deficit. And then they can, the screen's not showing everything. Usually there's the revenue option with the sales tax and the property taxes and the other taxes, where you could go in and say, well, let's do an additional sales tax or increase our utility tax, and that will help pay for some of this. So they can go back and forth till they decide they have the budget balanced the way they like, and then they could submit it, And the program collects all of the data from all of the users and all the inputs and all the solutions that they came up with. So then we, as recipients of that data, can get an idea of what trade-offs the community users prefer and maybe what services they might be most important to them. So I'm going to exit out of this and go to the simulation that I set up. I can find it. It's hiding under the meeting button. Can anyone see this? It says simulations, and it has a list of budgets.
Yep.
Okay, great. This is the one that I'm actually working on. You can see City of Kenmore, and we've done a lot of iterations and development of our 2019 and 2020 budget. But what I was thinking, and what Rob and I thought might be more interesting, is to build a simulation based off the next biennium using the actual out-of-balance deficit situation that Management Partners has identified and let people try to solve for that. So let's see how it looks. Wow, it's not coming up the way that I'd hoped it would. Just doesn't look like this at all, because generally it has not a pie chart, but a chart on the left, revenues on the right, or below, and spending on the bottom. But you can see that I've built it to generate a $2.1 million deficit, and these are some of the tax buckets, and then these are some of the revenue or the spending buckets. And this is not a very impressive presentation because you're not seeing it the way you would normally see it. Maybe it's because I'm in Internet Explorer, I'm not sure. But we have started to look at building some scenarios in here. For instance, what would happen with a property tax lid lift? What about a new B&O tax, or a TBD sales tax, or solid waste utility tax? So folks could sort through these and answer the question yes or no, see what the impact is. So in this case, levy a solid waste utility tax. If you said yes, we've already calculated what that 5% utility tax might yield. So we would have it built in, and in this case, $309,000. So that would get added to the revenue side, and you can see that it changes the deficit and reduces it from 2.1 to $1.8 million. So my suggestion was we could enhance this, put in some of Management Partners' strategies, quantify the ones that we can, build them into this model. And if we did that, do you think that would be a good tool for our public engagement meeting?
I think it would be great. It's really easy to read and seems very user-friendly that people can play around and have an experience with it. I've never seen anything like it. I think it's really great.
Okay, good.
I agree. This is Mike.
Was that Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're not even seeing it in its real. It's very impressive when you first pull it up, and it doesn't look like this at all.
Well, I think the great thing about it is that, and particularly for me, I'm not a government employee, so a lot of what we've discussed over these few meetings has been very eye-opening in terms of what it costs to run the city, and I would imagine that I'm not alone in that. I think there's a lot of people that don't truly understand the cost of everything that our city provides.
That's,
I think it also, Joanne, having the costs and the revenues side by side, which I think in just a normal browser, I think it's trying to display in mobile mode, which is why you're getting a different view. But yeah, having that side by side and showing the deficit like in there, it's much easier to say no new taxes. I'm not voting for a new tax. But it's different to say, well, if you want a balanced budget and you want to not have any taxes, then all right, here's your options. Go through and click it until the deficit is no longer red. And having that visual like engagement, I think that is a good way to kind of produce the kind of thinking that we need everybody who would be involved in this process to think, and not just say, we want more and more and more, and no taxes. So, so putting it there for them to play with, I think puts them in the right mindset for anybody that we want to engage.
I would agree. Absolutely. It's very effective.
I'm glad you think so. What mode did you say I was in, Jeff? Bubble?
Well, I think what it is most websites nowadays, if your resolution is too small, it will assume that you're viewing it on a mobile device.
Oh, mobile.
And so if you're probably displaying the browser, or you're probably mirroring the projector, which is a pretty low resolution. Sorry, I'm getting too technical, but just know that it's probably not your fault.
Thank you. That's helpful because, when I pulled it up earlier tonight, it looked great, but I wasn't projecting it, and now it looks totally different. And maybe this is what a person would see if they come to a public meeting and we run through this, and people would be able to do it on their mobile device. And I've heard that folks have a lot of fun with that. So I was pretty eager to see if you thought that would be something we could do, as well as put it on the website and let folks use it over the course of a month or two and then collect the data from it.
I think that would be smart to give people access to it, in the months leading up to those public engagement meetings, to give them the opportunity to see that and that to be shared on social media, where we get all of our information these days. But I think it's a really effective tool and puts it in the hands of the other citizens of Kenmore to see what's going on.
Okay, so you feel like I should move forward with that?
Well, just wondering, Darlene or Lou, I don't think we've heard from you. Do you have any reactions?
Yes, regarding the admissions tax, I'd like to know how that would be levied, what the amount would be. You're showing the solid waste utility tax of $309,000. So what would the admissions tax be? Say you're proposing it on golf. So how would that be levied, number one? And then what expenses would possibly be offset or covered by that category of tax?
Do you want me to address that, Rob?
Sure.
So an admissions tax is a general tax, and it can be used for whatever municipal purposes the city wants to use it for. The way it would be levied, let's go with the golf course. It would be levied on those that participate in the golf course, and I understand that the golf course that you have in your community, of course, is a private golf course. There would be an apportionment of the member dues. The city would have to work with the golf course operator, right, in terms of the membership fees. What portion of those membership fees are related to the actual use of the facility versus like meals, cocktails, other things like that. Food, beverage type service are not eligible and are not levied through an admissions tax, but like driving range, and clearly the use of the course. If there were a fitness center there, if there were other tennis courts or other things that might be other amenities that would provide for a private golf course like that, those would be subject to that. And then it just depends on what the percentages the city would implement. I believe the state law is limits it up to 5%. That number, I'll have to check that, but I know with one of the other communities I was working with, we were looking at a 5% that would generate some significant revenues for them. Does that help understand kind of how it works?
Somewhat. I'm just wondering how the Constitution's uniformity clause would apply to admissions tax on a private entity. How do you differentiate that from charging an admissions tax on me as a private individual going to and from my own home? You see, we as the members at Inglewood each own a portion of that club, of the real estate and so forth.
Right.
So charging us to be admitted to our own private property seems to me a constitutional issue.
Yeah, see, and that's where we'll have to pull in legal counsel in terms of how that would get implemented.
That's right.
The portion that you own, if part of your dues are for ownership of that facility, my understanding is that would not be eligible as a part of what your admission tax would be on.
That's correct. Under the Constitution, you'd have to be charging each homeowner in Kenmore an admission tax to be admitted to their own home as well.
Yeah. By the way, the admissions tax, in terms of on what it's levied upon, the city has, as long as it's meets the definition of a recreational amenity or entertainment purpose that's under state law, the city can decide whether it wants to levy it on one or more or several types of things. So it can do it on performing arts, and it can do it on golf, but it doesn't have to do it on bowling alley. It doesn't have to do it on waterfront amusement. So the city can make some choices in terms of what it is levied on.
Just for a little background on that, right now there is an admissions tax in our code that allows for a tax to be collected on admissions to a theater, because I think at some time there had been envisioned to be a theater in the city. But it's very specific to the theater, which we don't have. So what we would do, I think, is look at what other opportunities might be coming forth over the years that would potentially charge admission if there were to be some performing arts centers in the city or sporting events or something else that potentially could generate or required admissions that could then generate an admissions tax. So these were...
That makes more sense.
Yeah, just ideas we threw out because we've got it on the books, but it doesn't do us any favors at this point.
Okay. So this is
Thank
Jim.
you. Yes,
Okay.
Theater would be more consistent with, I think, the intent of an admissions tax.
It would. It definitely would. So go ahead and bring us a theater, okay? I think we were at one point going to had a theater in the design for Kenmore Village.
Good.
So this is
Many
Jim.
years
I'm
ago.
just going to jump in to say we've got about 10 minutes or so. So I'm sorry if I didn't ask the question clearly enough, but I just wanted to get any other reactions or words of support or any discouragement of Joanne for using this balancing act tool at the public engagement meeting. So, I mean, Lou, did you like this tool? And how about you, Darlene? I just wanted to hear from those of you who hadn't had a chance to comment on it. Then we'll return to some of your final thoughts about different strategies that were introduced tonight.
I like the tool.
Okay, thanks.
I like the tool because I think, looking at it and seeing like what you're spending on would really encourage taxpayers, just like Elizabeth said. So yeah, it's really good, and I think it's good to put it out there for people to see.
Great. Well, thank you. And what I will do is work closely with Steve to quantify as many strategies as we can. I don't think we'll be able to quantify all of them or pull all of them into the simulation, but we'll do the best we can to try and develop the best sense of what people are thinking out in the community.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. So with the last few minutes, as you see on the agenda, we did want to ask you if you have any thoughts and ideas. What were any more reactions to what Steve presented tonight? Are you starting to formulate your ideas? I mean, we heard a couple things from Lynn saying, well, you really can't kind of afford to not look at these ideas, including even in some of the expenditures. But how about the rest of you? Do Do you have some things you're starting to think, this looks appealing, this doesn't look quite as attractive to me? And we won't necessarily hold you to this yet because it's preliminary.
Did we miss anything?
Yeah, and actually Joanne just said too, did we miss anything tonight? Thank you.
On Steve's initial strategies, those 4 slides and the 4 categories, was there anything on there that was just absolutely revolting to you? And keep in mind, all this stuff needs further analysis before any of them turn into recommendations. But I think I heard Lynn say a couple that were kind of not very appealing to her, but any others? Are there any of those from those slides that just like absolutely not?
I think so.
And Steve, can you just pull up those 4 slides real quick? I think it's like slides 15 through 18, I believe.
The trick is being able to show them to you all on one screen. So here, let me just change my
we can just
view
go through
here.
Yeah, you can just go through them one at a time real quick.
Yeah, real quickly.
Well, I almost got 4 on a screen.
Okay. Well, so for example, under the expenditure controls and shift costs, or cost shifts, and under the business incubator, I mean, Jeff just asked the question about, is there kind of an equity portion? So, I mean, that was one reaction. I don't know if we had any other reactions to the strategies, the possible strategies on that screen, but maybe somebody else, if you have a chance to look at them right now, we could take a minute to get anybody else's ideas.
And again, for the viewing public, we're looking at slides 15 through 18.
My only request would be to do a cost-benefit analysis on, say, the business incubator program or the vehicle maintenance services, parks and landscaping maintenance, just to look at what the costs are. Are we really enjoying the benefits from those costs? And therefore, if we're not, consider, say, the business incubator program doing away with that. But if it is in the long run, say 1 or 2 or 3 years from now, paying for itself, paying dividends, then certainly keep it. Right now, I'm not sure if the returns of subsidizing a certain few small business people with the tax dollars of other business people is the best use of our tax dollars.
Okay. Okay. Yep, I got that one. So anybody else on this particular slide, which is the expenditure controls and cost shifts, number 15. Then we'll move on if. Okay, should we go to the next one? Oh.
Real quick, sorry. I mean, no disrespect when I say this, but Kenmore is a pretty small city, and lean processes can cost money depending on how they're done. I just don't know if the benefit would be worth the cost. State Auditor's Office, though, I know does some lean processes at no charge, so that might really be worth it.
Yes, that's true.
I think from that standpoint, lean, I feel like you can do like a 2-hour training for your employees and kind of demonstrate the lean mentality and say like, hey, you know, take a look at what you're doing and see if there's anything that you could consolidate or get rid of. But involving consultants to come in and do like a full assessment or something like that, that doesn't seem, yeah, like Lynn said, it doesn't seem like we've got enough to justify something like that. I really wanted to, I was curious about the low maintenance, the various low maintenance options for some of the, like the parks and landscaping and things like that. I'd be curious to know what those look like, and that seems like something that is probably looked at every time one of these projects is considered. Like what are the options and what is the maintenance cost associated with that? So I'd be curious to know if there is really a significant amount of impact for things like that haven't already been considered, and what.
Yeah.
It would clearly change the character of some of the potential uses, and I'll have to. I don't want to hold this up to look at the capital improvement project plan, but when you have a park that is high maintenance, a lot of uses, meandering walkways through it, playgrounds, those types of things. It's a lot more expensive than if it were on the flip side, more of a part of a trail. I'm just going way opposite extremes here, right? A trail doesn't take much in terms of cost to maintain, whereas a thriving high-use park, order of magnitude could be fivefold in terms of what you're spending for annual maintenance on that. Especially if you have to mow and blow, as often as you do between, April-ish to October time frame.
When it comes to sidewalks and streetscapes, so like one example is 155th Street on the south end of the city. Back in 2004, the city got a grant to do a sidewalk project there, and it's a pretty long project. And there's a landscape strip there, between the curb and the sidewalk. And the city put in these ornamental shrubs that look terrible if you don't keep them trimmed every couple weeks, especially during the growing season. And then plus there's the weeding of the landscape strip. And we haven't been able to get private property owners to take care of it. So we've been paying a landscape contractor to go and trim those ornamental shrubs quite often during the growing season in the summer. And I've told my public works operations manager, I said, hey, if you just want to yank those out and put in wood chips, I'm fine with that. But that's an example of where some expensive landscaping got put in, and it was the city's doing. We chose those ornamental shrubs. And you know what, though? When those ornamental shrubs are nice and trimmed, they look gorgeous, and it makes the neighborhood look great. So that's just one example. When we do the Juanita 68th Avenue sidewalks that we're going to be going out to bid on soon, I've definitely directed my staff to install low-maintenance native plantings along those that are going to be going in. And our operations manager has definitely been plugged into all that, and she's been prescribing what she wants to see in the way of low-maintenance plantings along those future landscape strips.
So my watch says it's 8:30. If you could just bear with us, how about if we just went through those last two slides, 17 and 18, and just give you a chance to look at them again and give us any reactions you might have. So if you can bear with us for just a couple more minutes, then we'll adjourn. So here's the revenue enhancements, both councilmanic and voter approval.
I don't know that the Metropolitan Park District would be worth looking at, and the reason I say that it's a very complicated and sometimes controversial initiative, and there's really no benefit to the Kenmore taxpayer. So I'm not sure what the incentive would be to pass that initiative.
Okay, anybody else? And we've already heard a couple comments or reactions to this, like the admissions tax, utility tax, or a swim tax perhaps, a couple other things here. Okay, let's go on to the other one then. which would be our last. Number 18, these are the service level reductions. We've heard Lynn say, why reduce travel and training when you're trying to motivate your staff or train them to be even better? Would that really be much of a savings? But anything else here that you see? Anybody? Okay, maybe that's enough then for this evening, but it's a good start. Right. Okay. So just before we go though, maybe we should say one word about the public meeting, which is, or the public engagement meeting, which is now just delayed 1 week. So it's going to be 2 weeks from tonight, the 24th of March. I think there is some language here on the agenda. If you want to consult that, this kind of gives you the reason why and what are kind of some features of it, including the fact that there would be public participation and the chance to kind of call in live, or not call in, but live question and answer. But I should hand that over to Rob and Joanne.
Yeah, let's say my wildest dreams come true and 100 people want to get in on this. The Zoom license that Management Partners has that capability for 100 people or more to participate, and the license allows the host to control who can speak and who can't, and it allows participants to click a little button where they raise their hand if they want to speak. So I've never done it before, but Steve, do you think it's doable?
Yeah, clearly we would be using really Zoom's webinar feature, and so it's very versatile and will allow for great engagement. You can actually pose questions to the audience and show up the results and the answers if we wanted to go that route. But it's an option. The COVID-19 is creating a whole new environment for all of us in terms of dealing with this, and local government is so focused on bringing people together, right? And we can't right now. So the next best thing is to do something like this. Understanding, though, that there are some people that maybe are a little hesitant of using this technology, and I get that, but it's better to have this than it is to have nothing, or to maybe even not do the meeting at all. I don't know. But all the technological features, we could do up to 1,000 people. I triple dog dare you, Ken Moore, to pull 1,000 people into this webinar on this topic.
Wow, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, and just jumping in here, this is Lauren Homiak. I'm the new communications specialist for the city and joining this project, so tonight was really helpful for me to catch up. But, I think it'd be important to keep the momentum going if we can involve the public virtually on the 24th. So I'm definitely in support of that. And just wanted to let you guys know I'm working on some outreach materials and website updates. And so just open to engagement ideas from you guys on how we can get as much of the community involved in this as possible. So I think a virtual meeting is one way to get started, but Joanne, I think your balancing act tool looks great, especially for reaching people that can't make it to public meetings. So anyway, I'll make sure you guys have my contact information, but just want you to know I'm here as a resource and would love your ideas on our, additional public engagement strategies.
One thing I would actually specifically request on that, if you could put together kind of like bite-sized social media appropriate things that we can post to the various Nextdoor and the Facebook groups and things like that I don't have to think about, how to type it out or those kinds of things that we can share and that other people can share and things like that. I think that would be helpful.
Yes, I will definitely work on that. And we have, we'll be working on some kind of flashy graphics that people can, get the information really easily and digest it. So more to come on that. But if you guys are willing to help share it through your channels and on places that I might not have access to, the more the merrier. So I will work on a social media calendar that I can share with all of you guys. It'll just be maybe another week or so before we have some of these graphics to push out with it.
Any other good suggestions like Jeff's? Okay. And thank you, Lauren. Thanks for introducing yourself, and then thanks for the things that you said you could provide everybody too, including the calendar. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you for remaining a little bit longer. And our next meeting is 3 weeks from tonight, March 31st. So I bet we'll have a lot to talk about. both from the public engagement meeting as well as continuing these conversations. So again, we'll get the agenda out to you a couple days beforehand, but I think you should be all encouraged to come and participate in the public engagement meeting too in the same kind of ways. So thank you for your participation tonight. Anybody, Rob or Joanne, you have any final words?
Well, this is Rob. I just see some maybe mystery callers on the line. The 206
No, this is
941.
probably me. This is Mike. I inadvertently dropped out of the call, just called back in.
Oh, okay. So it's you on audio and video. Okay. And then the 402 973 0363.
That's Darlene. I just.
Oh, there you are, Darren. Okay, got it. So you're doing the same thing. Got it.
So
Okay.
we're missing Anthony
Yeah.
tonight.
Yeah, we missed Anthony.
Yeah, we're just missing Anthony tonight. Okay.
Thank you. Clearing that up.
Okay, folks, we're adjourned. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for this
Thank
fun
you.
experiment. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, I really, really appreciate